My hope, my goal today, when you hear from LeSean, he's going to inspire you. My hope is you learn a thing or two. And my hope is in 20 years, we're showing your anime on this screen. So the way today works, we're going to start with a screening. We're going to show a behind-the-scenes video. Mike Peterson, or as I know him, and you will soon know him, Coach Mike, is an amazing guy. Coach Mike was born in Brooklyn, and is a New York City based, yes, Brooklyn. Coach Mike was born in Brooklyn and is a New York City based educator, community leader, author, speaker, marketer, and cultural influencer. He's a recognized creative with strong roots in this and many more communities. He's the founder and CEO of the Imagination Project and works with partners around the globe to bring underserved communities together and create new projects that foster career technical education, social and emotional aptitude, and community development. From the streets of Brooklyn to Tokyo and Berlin, Mike has used his skills to bring young people cultural influence, cultural creation, and community together. And everything you're seeing today wouldn't be possible without him. So please, a round of applause for Coach Mike.
Yeah! Brooklyn, we in the building? Alright, so I'm gonna do this like this is high school. We here to have some fun. We're gonna do a room check, right? Like we here to show. So of course, I'm gonna leave the best borough for the last borough. Right. But we got Manhattan, we got Uptown in the building, Uptown, Manhattan. We got the Bronx, BX here. Oh. Queens. It's alright, you know. We got some Staten Island. I'm a Long Island. Alright, when we do this next one, you know what we gotta do, right? You know what we gotta do, right? It's Brooklyn in the building! Love it. My name is Mike Peterson. Everyone calls me Coach Mike. Everyone say, hey, Coach Mike.
Hey, Coach Mike.
I am honored to have you here in the space and in the building to witness Children of Youth. Can we get a round of applause for Children of Youth? And be in the space and meet LeSean and hear this conversation that we're about to have around creating the impossible. And what you have to know, just a precursor to this conversation, is that this is the impossible, right? A lot of you didn't know that was the first animated short from Crunchyroll, right? Not only that, a kid from the Bronx, right? We know Bronx is in the building, BX is here, right? To have produced that, created that, gone to Korea, gone to Japan, and actually be able to make some of the most historical work in the world of television animation and series, but I would argue to say some of the most important work in film in general, in order to inspire you to be able to hopefully, you know, in 15, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, have the understanding on how to produce this and how to do this. And so in concepting and creating all of this stuff with Japan Foundation and Japan Society and Peter Tatara and Joshua and everyone that's here in the building and working together to bring this, this is also history here at Japan Society. So out of this 100 plus years, I don't think there's ever been this many high school students in the building at one time. So give yourselves a round of applause. Here making history. And that's what this is all about. And we hope to inspire you and give you information that allows you to then go back and begin to create and dream and think outside of the box, right? I have to say this, and this is very important, right? School is a conduit to make your dreams happen. Don't think about so much of the rigmarole or the boredom of math and English and science, which doesn't have to be boring. They are the pieces that will create the future. And I think Children of Ether is so important because there are a lot of nuances in this short film, whether you want to, think about climate control, and all of the things that we have to shift and change. And this is New York City. How many of you saw the train stations, or you saw the life building, and you saw, right? That could really happen, right? Right? We think about those things, and as you begin to create and draw and build and dream, I want you to center the love that I have for this city, that I'm sure many of you have for this city. That is very important. And Japan society, being in New York City, is very, very important. And so, with that, I would like to introduce our creator, our inspiration, someone who I am very happy to be connected to and connected with and build with and have this conversation with. Please, everyone stand up, please. We gotta do this right, like we here, we gotta do this right. We gotta do this right, we gotta do this right. Give it up for LeSean Thomas. So, I like that. Y'all working. Appreciate you. What I want to do is I want to start with, we all love a good origin story, right? Right? We all love a good origin story. This is going to be a lot of engaging activity, right? So we're going to have some fun. So, if you hear something that you like, something that, shout it out. Have fun. Be here. Be with me. But origin stories, we like origin stories, right? How many of you like origin stories? Yeah. Let's start with your origin story, LeSean. Tell us a little bit about
how y'all doing, man? Thanks for showing up. I really appreciate it. It's early. You won't be able to get me to go anywhere this early in the morning. Respect, much respect. I'm born and raised in the South Bronx, 152nd.
BX?
Yeah. A lot of Bronx people. I'm from the house. That's what's up. Born and raised 152nd, Senior Union. You take the 405. For y'all, I take the 405 train to Jackson Avenue. It's the first stop after 149th and 3rd Ave. Everybody from Brooklyn, or most people from Brooklyn, they probably don't even
We don't go to the Bronx, man.
Nope.
It don't happen.
I didn't go to Brooklyn when I was growing up.
Like 3 times.
I'm serious. And so I'm one of 8 currently. Initially one of 4. I'm the second oldest, and I grew up in mostly Latino community over there, and so I think my elementary school experience was really unique. I came into illustration copying my older brother because firstborn, the first boy being born, hallelujah. You know what I'm saying? Second boy being born, another boy. Watch out for him. And then the third born was the first girl, hallelujah, right? And so I was kind of sandwiched between that for a minute. And so I faded into the background and just stayed focusing on something that would keep me busy, whether it's like Nintendo or drawing, you know what I'm saying? And so the drawing got me in trouble in elementary school because my grades weren't that good because I was too focused on drawing. So I wasn't not a smart kid, I was just what they would call it mischievous, and so, and this was in the 80s, because I'm born in 75. I know I dress like a 12-year-old, so I look younger.
Yeah.
But I'm actually 49, and so I was born in 1975 during a very particular era. I know black don't crack, right? And so, I came up during the war on drugs, the crack epidemic, Reaganomics. These are all for y'all probably a lifetime ago. But for me, that was my era, and much like y'all coming up in y'all age, in y'all era, you have specific obstacles that are happening in society. And so for me, I got to avoid a lot of those obstacles because my mom understood that the drawing was going to keep me indoors, not outside playing around. Because when you have that many kids, whoever screams the loudest gets the attention. And so I was really, really fortunate in being one of those kids who stayed indoors and stayed focusing on illustration. And so instead of my mother taking those tools away from me, which was a very common occurrence coming up in the 80s and 90s, because obviously I'm Gen X, so I'm first generation post-civil rights movement. during that time, the movement was about, okay, we got equality. It's time to get doctor jobs. It's time to get lawyer jobs. It's time to get these kinds of things. And art was, even then, and even still now, today, is considered an esoteric, non-lucrative career move, depending on who you talk to. And so, my mom, instead of being afraid of saying, instead of being afraid of, me going in a direction that isn't going to meet the typical expectations of what it means to be a success as a Black American, she saw that as an opportunity for me to engage in something that I actually liked. And so, instead of taking the tools away from me, by the time I graduated junior high school, she would enroll me into an arts high school. And I don't think it was because she thought this was a really good thing. She thought more like, okay, good, so you can do the school thing and then still do your art thing instead of being one or the other. And so she enrolled me into a Julia Richmond High School on 67th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue, Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan. The school doesn't exist anymore as I understand it, but during that era, it was a really, really, really interesting school in that it focused on the arts as well. And we were in a program called Talent Unlimited, which was, the acronym was TU. And it was TU Drama, TU Dance, TU Chorus, and TU Art. And I was in the TU Art program. Little known story, I don't know if y'all know who YASUKE is or Mos Def is.
Most Def, yeah.
But I only know him as Dante Smith, and he was a sophomore the year that I entered Julia Richmond High School. And he dropped out because he got his first job as a child actor on a TV show on Channel 11. That channel doesn't exist for y'all anymore, but starring in a family sitcom show starring Dylan Carter, rest in peace, called You Take the Kids. And it was about a single Black mom doing a co-parenting relationship with her husband who wasn't around. And Mos Def was one of the kids. And so when I got into the school, that was a huge, huge celebration. The principal was like, everyone, congratulate Dante Smith, yada, yada, yada. And I didn't know who he was because I was a freshman that year. And this is a side quest story. And so later on, I learned that he wound up being Mos Def. But I only knew him as Black Stars, Mos Def and Tyler Qualley. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And when I graduated, when I left that school, I was being groomed unknowingly to be an illustrator. I had to learn all the basic things: volume, structure, form, art theory. And when I graduated junior high, Julia Richmond, I didn't really know what I wanted to do because at that time, there weren't any really sound directions of where you can go with illustration. And so I started trying to do everything.
Let me pause you there too. So in high school, you were drawing quite a bit, right? Was there any like classmates, people you were hanging out with that was about that? Were you kind of a loner? Like how did in the art stuff? I know you all have your group of friends and you hang out, but like how did you refine those skills? I mean, there's natural talent and there's also right like refining that skill, right? Because you talk about like form, you talk about all these things that become important as you develop that skill, but you were pretty talented. So how did you do that throughout those years? I mean, you were in a school with a lot of talented people, right? But like, how did that go?
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of what we talked about earlier this week. It was, my environment. Even from elementary school, because I grew up in an all-Latino elementary school, a lot of my childhood friends were also illustrators. My boy Manuel Calo, my boy Robert Rivera, Santos. These guys were all dudes that would do little mini comics, and then we would finish each other's comics throughout class, and they'd do a couple of panels of some dude getting stabbed, and then I'd get it, and then I'd turn it and get head chopped off. And so I had that kind of crazy relationship with my friends as growing up as kids. But then when I started going to junior high school, Julia Richmond, my relationship with my community faded because, as you know, you don't leave your borough really. And for me, I stayed in the South Bronx until I was like 14. And then when I went to high school, I had to get on the 2 train and go downtown. And so I started making friends in Julia Richmond High School where all these different students from different boroughs started coming around. So I started making more friends from cats from Brooklyn, Staten Island, if you can believe it. You know what I'm saying? And so I think my environment changed. I started meeting cats who were drawing comic books, and I wanted to be a comic book illustrator. That's how I got started. And so for me, I was always lucky to be around people who were also interested in the arts. And I think when I went to high school, Julia Richmond really, unknowingly at the time, but in hindsight, really taught me how to navigate relationships and connections, and how to stay in touch with people who would later go on to be folks who support you through your career down the line. And so, I think Julia Richmond was probably a key factor and base for me to learn how to engage with the professional world. And not everybody gets to have that opportunity. And so, for me, I developed a lot of my skills in high school with friends who wanted to be comic book illustrators. And so I think that's when my group started to change a little bit. I would come back home to the Jets, trying to have projects. I would come back home to the Jets and hang out with my homies. They weren't into illustration as much as I got older. And so I started leaning more into my circle in Manhattan. You know what I'm saying? And so that's kind of how my skill set developed.
But, you know, obviously there's still that influence, you know, just, you know, we saw it in Children of Ether, right? Like, you have a little animal character named Biggie, right? She's looking for the goat, right? So, you know, maybe talk a little bit about how your New York City upbringing also influenced, you know, your later works and maybe even the works that you were working on in high school. Because, you know, what I always find interesting is, you know, as we grow up and as, you know, we become adults, we are lucky enough to do the things that we dreamed of as children, right? But this generation also has the opportunity to do everything that they want to do right now, right? Which, you know, you always say this and you said this over the past couple of days, great time to be a creator.
I'm jealous of you.
Right?
So I have so much stuff to do in so many
different ways.
Tools, so many different ways than what we did coming up in the 80s and the 90s.
And New York City obviously influences your work, and I don't know if we have I think the screen is going to pop on at some point. You guys get to see some of the YASUKE stuff and the images, but I think talk a little bit about that, right? So Julia Richmond, you know, your neighborhood, they're not really drawing as much, but at the same time, it's still influencing, you know, and I think you said John Adams projects, right? Yeah, so it's still influencing your work and your trajectory and what you want to, knowing what you want to create and what you want to see as you're building that road and that journey towards, you know, your definition of success.
Right. I think for me, definitely, you know, growing up from 1990 to 2000, that's probably the peak of my development, because I went from being 15 years old to being 20 years old, you know, to 25 years old. And I think for a lot of y'all from that age, you know, especially in high school, that's when you start to find yourself. So I grew up in a hip-hop girl, so I got to see all the OGs, you know, the Nas's, the Biggies, and so on and so forth. And so as I got older, when I got into positions of creative leadership and agency, having my own intellectual properties, creating my own IPs, I started pulling back from the stuff that I grew up enjoying. And that's kind of, you know, what informs a lot of the stuff that you see, those little hip-hop motifs. And mainly because, you know, I don't see a lot of that stuff in TV, especially 2D animation. We don't really get to see those things implemented. We see cartoons that take place in New York City for sure, but it's usually Spider-Man or an interpretation of New York City like Metropolis and Superman. But we don't really get to see a lot of, you know, direct influences and references to the real world in 2D animated shows that reflect what's going on, you know, in the current world that we live in. And so, also for adults, because what y'all just watched was not for children. And so, I think definitely my influence for hip hop and, you know, seeing the world and incorporating that stuff into my work played a big role.
How did you create this North Star, right? Because one thing I think we get confused about when it comes to animation is, you know, there's the children's cartoons, right? There's your Blue's Clues, there's your, right? But then, you know, anime, one thing we know is that it doesn't necessarily fall into that realm of, you know, your 5 to 7 year old, you know, cartoon, right? And so how did you create, you know, this idea, this North Star of like, yo, I'm gonna do that stuff, right?
Yeah, I think for me, the pressure was to be able to do something with what I learned in school. You know, obviously everyone's taught that once you're done with school, you gotta get a job. And so the goal is to hopefully get a job doing what you went to school doing. You know, and that's not always the case for everybody. Sometimes people have to go outside of that realm or do side opportunities before they get back on their path. But for me, I knew I wanted to focus on illustration. I just didn't know how. And so opportunities started to fall in front of me. And one of those opportunities at the time I didn't understand, and we talked about this, was I got a job as an unpaid intern, which is unheard of nowadays. But this was the 90s, and so the economy was popping in the 90s. And so money was around. And so they were having people, you know, coming onto jobs and being paid, even though they didn't know anything, just so they can, you know, learn on the field, you know, so that you can be prepared on the job in the field. And so for me, I got a job as a unpaid intern at a children's accessories company called Pyramid Handbags. And what they did was those cheap vinyl backpacks for kids that slap like a big SpongeBob on it. You can find it in the fashion department, you know, fashion district in Manhattan. And they would do molded umbrella handles with like all over print, you know, umbrella tops and stuff like that. And it was an opportunity that I landed while I was working part-time at a sporting goods store for models. This is when I was trying to find work, and I was taking classes in college at the same time, and trying to find a job being an illustrator. Because I wanted to do comics, but in the 90s, American comics was at its highest. You know what I'm saying? Comics was selling like millions and millions of copies, and New York was just a haven for comic book illustrators. Marvel and DC still had their bullpens, and so the competition to be a comic book artist back then was crazy. Like, you couldn't just get a gig, you know, unless you were super, super talented like Jim Lee or Mark Silvestri. And so for me, I saw that as an opportunity later, you know, once I finished working at that job. But at the time, I didn't want that job. It came to me by my sporting good, Model sporting good boss. He was a manager, Sean Henderson, I'll never forget him. And I was drawing on the back of these sales tags. I was working in the stock department. And he was like, you can't draw on these sales tags, we don't use them anymore. And then he would come back and be like, yo, this is dope. Yo, how'd you do these? You know?
Yeah, always be drawing. I'm sure some of y'all got y'all sketchbooks right now. You never know who's gonna see it.
Right, and so he said, yo, me and my wife, she works at this company called Pyramid. She's an art director, and maybe I can send her some of your stuff. I was like, whatever, you can take those. And then he came back to me a couple of months later and was like, yo, my wife is looking for some help at her company. And Pyramid Accessories, they had a lot of different licenses. They had WWF, you know, Disney, Sanrio, Smiles, Hello Kitty. They did all of that stuff. And so, I'm in there. Back in the day, you had those big, ugly black portfolios, so you had to do everything on paper. So these big comic book, you know, all I had was comic book pages. I didn't have anything else. And so I walked into that space, and I showed them my work, and they were like, "Wow, this is really nice. No one at our office can illustrate." Amy was looking at the work, and she was like, "We're not really sure if we can use you, but this is really incredible work." Because at the time, no one at this job could actually illustrate. They were all designers and graphic designers. They were working in Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop when they made their backpack designs. And so I think a month later, I went back trying to work on my comic book pages because I was trying to get work at Marvel Comics, and they would have you do sample pages for free. You work with an editor, and they're kind of like the A&R for music back in the day. And then Sean hit me up again and was like, hey, my wife is telling me that they're looking for some help in the WWF department, boys department. Why don't you send your portfolio then? And I didn't want to do it because I had gotten rejected the first time, but I went anyway.
Conquering fear.
The fear,
and
right?
failure. Right?
But actually, the part of the reason why I didn't want to go because it looked like work. It didn't look like anything that, you know what I'm saying, I wanted to do. You know what I'm saying? And I learned, taking that gig, through that job, I was able to not only learn office politics, but also learn how to communicate with different people in a closed space, working deadlines, milestones, and so on and so forth. And so I would say 2 months into that job, I was 20, and I turned 21 on that job. 2 months into that job being an intern, I was working on Mondays and Wednesdays doing free stuff. And I was just basically like ordering lunch, ordering breakfast, organizing backpack samples in the back, making photocopies for people. And I just saw that as an opportunity to put on my resume. I was gonna be a comic book illustrator, you know? And the way these licensing companies work, the way you get these backpacks and stuff like that with Disney characters and so on and so forth, they go to Disney and these corporations go to these different licensing companies, third-party licensing companies, and host these events. One of them is Magic, you know, the apparel expo in Las Vegas. And Disney would show them maybe a year and a half, 2 years, what their upcoming cartoons gonna look like to the licensors, so that by the time the movie comes out, the product is on the shelves. And so they came to Pyramid, they came to Amy, she went out there for Magic, and they pitched to her this new movie called Hercules. It's a musical, but they didn't have anything else, they just had a rough concept design of Hercules and the love interest. And so when she came back, they were like, we gotta do something with this. We wanna put together a series of molded umbrella handles, you know, rolling luggage, you know, wallets, backpacks, tote bags for kids. And so they came to me because I was the only one who could actually draw. And they were like, LeSean, you mind doing anything like that? And I was thinking to myself, don't pay me. I'm gonna get a check. But again, it looked like work. You know what I mean? And so I said, all right, cool. I went and found out what the general concept was because they didn't have a story that was complete, but I knew that it was based on the Hercules mythos. And so I went down to the New York Public Library. Remember those libraries? Libraries. Gotta use the library. Libraries grant a book. And so I went there and got all the books on the Hercules mythology. Because at that point, I was heavy into drawing comics. And so I just went, I had Pantone markers, and I just drew like maybe 25, 30 illustrations based on what I perceived as the adventures of Hercules based on the knowledge I had read in those books. The seven taps, the Cyclops, the three-headed dragon, and so on and so forth. And then I would put them in these little sealed circles, because that's kind of what they would do. And they would put that on some of the design packs, and I would like color those things up. And I did that on a Monday. Like over the weekend, they gave me this task on Friday. And at the time when it came to me, even though I thought it looked like work, I was thinking to myself, yeah, this is what you want to do. This is why I brought me on it too. I'm going to show you, how it goes down. And so that whole weekend, I had grinded out like 25 illustrations and then handed them to Amy on my Monday. And then on Tuesday, I unknowingly found out that Jeffrey, who was the owner of that company, had met with them on the day that I wasn't there. And they all sat down with him, and they quickly took my drawings and put them together on all these backpack designs and did this whole image board mock-up of the different sets with my artwork on it. And Jeffrey was like, who drew these? Nobody can draw. And nobody here can draw.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so Amy was like, oh, it's this kid LeSean, he's really, really sweet, he's been helping us out. And Jeffrey didn't even know they had me working.
He didn't even know you was the intern.
And so he saw this stuff and he was like, oh, okay, I want to see who this kid is. And so the following week he comes in on a Monday, and I'm in the back organizing samples because that's one of my jobs, because they usually have bags all strewn out on the floor because they cut pieces up for PVC reference so they can send them to China to have the material reference. And Jeffrey, and I only saw this dude twice, and he's like classic, Jewish businessman, shoulder pads suits, salt and pepper beard and hair, glasses, and really, really fast talker, you know what I'm saying? And he was on the adjacent wall looking for a sample, and he never turned his back when he was looking up, and he was like, hey, LeSean, and I turned around, shook as hell, like, what's up? And he's like, so, I hear you're a really good illustrator, and I was like, yeah. He was like, so what do you think about coming to work for us? And I was like, alright, cool. And he was like, hey, great.
The interview.
Yeah,
the
and he
interview.
took the sample and left, and he never turned around to look at me. Right?
That was a quick interview.
Yeah, and so I'm like, oh, cool. And then so later on that day, right before lunch, I found that I had gotten the job to be an assistant designer. I called my manager, because I was still working at Model Sporting Goods. And I called him, I was like, Sean, yeah, they hired me, man. And he was like, I know, Amy told me last night. Don't F it up.
It's amazing. I kind of get around the applause.
$400. And I don't know what that is now. $400, like
$10,000.
But I was like, yo, I got a gig. You know what I'm saying? I'm in the office. They gave me my own cubicle. I had one of those little Macintosh computers. And I'm just like everybody else. I was still doing the free stuff, but I was getting paid to do it. Still ordering breakfast, ordering lunch, organizing samples, making photocopies. But they would give me jobs here and there, illustration gigs.
And also, too, it's always be drawing, right? So, some people would see, models. How many of y'all know what models is? Right? You know what models is, right? It's like Foot Locker. Some people would see that as like a failure, like, oh, you're not a real artist. You work at Foot Locker, You can't really do this, right?
Right.
And so this idea of, understanding that you have a North Star, you know what you want to do. You're like, yo, I'm going to do these comic books, right? I'm going to do this work. I'm going to make this happen. But then also, too, not shying away from work. Because the truth of the matter is, during that weekend, you did research, right? You of course, how many of y'all draw on your tablets or phones, right? Most of you draw on your tablets or phones, right? So that would be the equivalent of going to the library and doing research, like talking to ChatGPT for about 10 minutes and getting back all the images, but then you actually did that whole weekend of work. And then came back on Monday like, yo, look what I did. And not only that, let's be honest, you had a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah, you know, I felt the ways about it. I didn't, and that's another thing. But just in terms of like wanting to prove myself, you know what I'm saying? And that's not where I thought I was going to get a job. I thought I was going to get a job doing comics. But to my point earlier, a lot of opportunities look like work at the first time you see it.
A lot of opportunities look like work, and it looked like work, but also too it takes work.
Yeah.
And so we fast forward, and what I want to do is I want to engage with y'all real quick, right? How many of you? I don't know. We could choose a sound. Let's do snaps. Let me see y'all do snaps real quick, right? Just to make that simple. You know, we in Japan society, keep it, cool, close. If I say something that you know, right? Demure. We're gonna keep it demure. If I say a show that you know, I want you to snap, right? Legend of Korra, Ninja Turtles, Spider-Man,
Everyone should be snapping.
Airbender, Boondocks. Need I say more? It looked like work. This man has worked on all of those, and from a capacity of a creative leader too, right? So, going from drawing and saying like I'm gonna work on comics to then getting to a point where now, fast forward, you're literally doing, leadership work on the Boondocks. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, that was after I left New York City. Unfortunately, my mom passed away in 2000, and then the following year was 9/11. And so I was just like, for me, I had an opportunity to, sort of close off and sort of figure out how to navigate all of that. And I had just finished working on a web cartoon right in 2000. The late great George Jackson gave me my first opportunity and allowed me to work on my own web cartoon called Battle Sea for a website called Urban Box Office. And they had many websites under them, and one of them was othervision.com. And it was the first time someone was trying to do what we're currently doing now with social media, but it was just way too ahead of its time back then. We didn't even have cable modems back then, you know what I'm saying? We were still on 56K dial-up. We had flash drives, take like 3 hours to download 10 minutes, you know what I'm saying? And so, when I left to go down, right after the dot-com crash, all the work in animation in New York City dried up. And so they started outsourcing a lot more stuff. And so I taught 2 after-school programs. I forget the names escape me. One charter school in Brooklyn and another one in the South Bronx doing like art programs for kids while I was working on this new opportunity that I was given from this Toronto-based comic book publisher called Dreamwave. And they had me do a comic book called Arcanium, which was like my first like original comic series. And at that point, I had just finished animating on this web cartoon. I had did some freelance work on a kid's show called the Lizzie McGuire Show. Because it's this show about the white girl with the
cartoon character. Yeah. 100%.
Version, and it was an animation studio here in New York who did all of that animated part of the show that aired called Pop's Tunes. And so I was an assistant animator on that job after I finished doing all of that work. And what I realized is that I wanted to be an illustrator and have this super detailed style like Jim Lee, like cross-hatching, environmental design techniques. But because I was working at Pyramid Handbags and working on cartoon stuff for kids, my style simplified. And so by the time I got done with my Battle Sea cartoon and then Lizzie McGuire, my style opened up. My line knowledge just magnified by 100. I can draw anything. Because when you animate, you have to move stuff. And so you're forced to hide your weakness. You're forced to not hide your weaknesses. If you can't draw feet or a leg movement, you're screwed in animation because someone has to finish the work down the line.
Gotta know how to draw hands and feet.
You gotta know how to draw hands and feet.
You gotta know how to draw hands and feet. Gotta make that happen. We can't get to know children either if you can't draw hands and feet.
I know some of y'all probably hiding your hands and feet right now. They hard to draw, man. Yeah, it's hard to draw hands and feet. I used to draw my characters and then cut them off at the bottom.
They had no feet.
No feet. Oh, they had their hands in their pockets. Or their fists balled up. You know what I mean? Because I don't know how to draw hands. Drawing human figures is really difficult. Anybody's trying to learn how to draw manga right now, like drawing people is really, really hard. And so you have to really draw everything all the time. And so for me, one of the benefits of working in animation is that by the time I got my comic book gig, like I was ready to draw anything, different angles. And so I got that gig, and I worked on that project for I met an individual named Brian Ash, who was working on his own webcomic called Indie Planet. And this was also at Urban Box Office, and there was a colorist who worked on that show, who worked at Urban Box Office named Chris Walker. These names don't matter. But the people matter, but the names don't matter. And so Chris Walker was from Greensboro, North Carolina. He had moved to New York because George Jackson was bringing all young talent to him at the time. I think at the height of urban box office, under George Jackson's run, there was about maybe 890 young people between the ages of 21 and 35, all just designing. It was like college. It was my college for me, because I learned on the job. And my age, between 20 and 24, is usually the age between college students. Right.
That's a lot of young people, though. I mean, so it takes a lot of respect, too, like, for people to trust your work, right? To then understand, like, they respect and trust your work. Like, was it that you were just that good, or?
I mean, you can't ask me that question. I don't think anything I do is that good. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know a lot of artists can understand that.
Chilton was pretty good. Would we say that? That was pretty alright,
And so I think, me learning that style and working in that industry introduced me to a lot of people. It goes back to the networking aspect. And so I met Chris Walker. He was my colorist for the comic book series that I had gotten picked up. And I hired another gentleman named Brandon Easton, who he had just moved from Boston, and he was a teacher, and he was a writer. And so I brought him on board because I wanted an all-black, comic book team, working on this Dreamwave comic. And big homie Rob Stull was my anchor. And so Chris Walker wanted to move back to Greensboro. My mom had passed, 2 years prior. 9/11 happened a year prior, and I was just like shell-shocked from all of it emotionally, and I didn't realize it. And so he was like, "Yo, dog, like the work is dried up. We got this comic gig. We making Toronto money. I'm going back to Greensboro. They got these new condos. You know what I'm saying? We can cake up living down there, because the cost of living is much cheaper than living in New York City. And so we were making good money living in Greensboro. And so I went down there just to get a break, and that was the culture shock, because I was 28 when I left New York. New York to Greensboro is just, the difference is very different, you know what I'm saying? And so it was perfect for me because I was so shocked that I didn't leave my crib, because you had to drive everywhere, and I didn't have a license, and I was not driving in Greensboro. And so I stayed in the cave, and worked. But going to Greensboro, I met an individual named who would be another key creative partner for me throughout my career, which is a guy named Carl Jones. Now, Carl Jones, I met him in Greensboro. He was a really talented cartoonist, but he was not in the trajectory of going into film. And so when we met, it was perfect. Brian Ash from New York hit me up. He was working with Rockefeller Records and Beanie Siegel at the time. Beanie Siegel was...
You know a little bit about Rockefeller, right?
They probably don't know. That's way before their time. It's Jay-Z's company.
They
call it Rock Nation.
Rock Nation.
But originally it was Rockefeller Records. And so we were doing Brian was trying to get a cartoon greenlit for Beanie Siegel called The Playpen. And it started all of this, Beanie Siegel's company called State Property. And all of their artists, young Chris, Steve, all those guys. And so it was basically a bunch of kids, you know what I'm saying, like, it was basically like a South Park version of Kids, but the Playpen, but they were in the pen, but you know what I'm saying, they were like bad kids, And so Carl and I linked up, did that project. I moved to Philly because at the time my girlfriend was a journalist, and she got hired by the Philadelphia Inquirer, but she needed to be in-house to do that gig, and I was already freelance illustrating, so I moved to Philly. Carl moved to LA, met with Brian Ash for a little bit, and then Carl had met Aaron Magruder randomly on the street. And
Aaron Magruder, do we know
creator
that
of the
name?
Boondocks.
It's the creator of the Boondocks.
Yeah, and so they worked together. A few years later, the show got greenlit into a pilot with Fox, if you can believe the Boondocks on Fox. And
Boondocks on Fox. That could be a movie in itself, right?
It's an oxymoron right now.
Right.
They don't even belong in the same sense. But that pilot didn't go anywhere. But the CEO, Mike Lazo of Adult Swim, was really good friends with Aaron, and he convinced Aaron to bring the show to Adult Swim because Adult Swim's late night. You know what I'm saying? And so we can get away with stuff on late night cable. And so when the Boondocks got picked up by Adult Swim, Aaron was having a difficult time finding black artists in Hollywood who could storyboard anime style, but also interpret black culture at the same time, at least black culture at that time. Because you gotta remember, this is 2004. The only really dynamic storyboard artists back in that time were anybody who's working on stuff coming out of WB. Bruce Timm introduced, I believe, Bruce Timm created, the show Batman the Animated Series. That was the first real action cartoon in the West, where you needed to be able to And so that was the first real animated series. A lot of people don't know this, but Batman the Animated Series was the first animated series that forced domestic storyboard artists to step up their action storyboarding game. Because prior to Batman the Animated Series, that show came out in 1992. There was no shows really where we can really control the action, the fighting, and all that stuff the way, in the 80s when all that stuff was being outsourced. And so Aaron realized quickly, and I'm not speaking for him, it's just what it looked like, that he could not find. I was under the impression that he maybe believed, because he had no experience in Hollywood, he got to Hollywood through the show, that there would be a treasure trove of black artists waiting to work on a show like the Boondocks, with high-level storyboarding experience, could storyboard as well as any Japanese animator, because he was a fan of anime. We were all fans of anime, and we were learning the industry in Hollywood, and we learned that there weren't a lot of them. It was mostly white dudes working from Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, that whole community, and they all came from Cal Arts, Art Center, you know what I'm saying? And so we were just, three dudes, at the creative leadership level on the Boondocks. Carl with the writing, Aaron with the writing leadership, and myself on the creative lens. And I got brought on. So when Carl introduced me to Aaron over the phone, it's funny, when he was talking to me on the phone, I was just watching an interview with him on BET's Tavis Smiley show. And so the timing was crazy. Carl linked up, we talked. Aaron said, "Yo, how soon can you get out here?" And I said, "Give me a week." I flew out there, we chopped it up for a whole week. We sat down with Dennis Cohen, one of the co-executive producers of Static Shock at the time. Dennis Cohen was
Static Shock, right?
Yeah.
Especially for my shop.
Dennis Cohen was just fresh off of Static Shock, and he was one of the co-executive producers of season 1 of the Boondocks with Aaron. And I remember us sitting down and watching a VHS tape, because we had a copy of it, watching a VHS tape of this anime called Samurai Champloo. This was in 2006. This was before Toonami could even get a hold of cool stuff like that. And so we knew we wanted the show to look like that, because that was the first time we seen a high-level TV 2D animated series that depicted hip-hop culture and anime. And so we were like, yo, that's what's up. And so we were referencing that stuff, and realized that it was difficult trying to get other storyboard artists to follow that look. So when he hired me, I came on board as a supervising character designer. And that's how I got my first gig moving to LA.
So then you go from, so you're there, you're in LA. In between there, I know you do some amazing work on, Ben 10, Ben 10, right? Ben 10. But what I want to get to too is as we talk about traveling, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that leap and that jump from, first and foremost, how many of y'all want to go to Japan? I know some of y'all are coming with me, in a couple of months, but that's a big thing to just be able to get up and go.
Yeah, now's the best time, because it's cheap right now. The yen is weak.
Yeah, I said, listen, when I go, I plan on going with an empty suitcase because I'm buying everything.
And so, by the time Boondock season 2 wrapped up, it took almost 2 years for season 3 to get greenlit because of the contractual nature of how that show got greenlit. And so a lot of the talent after season 2 couldn't wait for another season to get greenlit because we got to eat. So we started dispersing and going to different studios. And that's when I went to Cartoon Network and worked under Big Brother Dwayne McDuffie.
Cartoon Network.
Yeah. I worked on, this was 2007, I got my first storyboarding gig. Well, first, really quick, because all of this stuff is connected. I got hired on the Boondocks as the lead character designer. Halfway through production, because of what I mentioned earlier about the difficulties of depicting certain comedy, Aaron realized that I had a really, really high level ability of sequential art because I was doing comics for such a long time. And so he was like, yo man, you can storyboard. I was like, I do a little bit here and there. I want to get my character design game up. And Boondocks I love that show because it was the first show we were open and accepted in doing anime love, but also black culture at the same time. And there was no other show being made like that in the Warner Brothers, space at that time. And so I wanted to stick to character design, but Aaron needed help on season 1. And so I sketched out a thumbnail sequence on trying to depict a sequence. I think it was late night, we were at the office and we were talking, and I sketched out on some post-it notes just a couple of quick ideas of this one scene called...
You got yourself more work.
Yeah, I got myself more work. And I want to, it's high school students here, but, it was called the end moment.
You can watch that episode, you know what I'm saying? Watch the episode, you know what it is. Most of y'all probably already seen it already.
Yeah. And so we sat down and we were trying to depict the scene, and I sketched this sequence of these two dudes walking into each other, and they bump into each other. He's like, "What's up?" And they start beefing, and then they pull out this gun and they start shooting at each other close range, and they listen and anything. And Aaron was just like, yo, like, I didn't know you could storyboard, dog. Why didn't you tell me that? And I'm just like, you ain't asking. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't know anything about Hollywood. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to keep my job. You know?
Like, yo, you could pay me for that too.
And so from that point on, I went on, and the show needed so many revisions because it's a comedy show. And, you know, comedy, really good comedy is through rewrites. And so that meant we were reboarding sequences to make things more funny. Yo, you know what would be funny if we did this? And then we would have to board that. Yo, you know what would be funnier if we did that? And that's how season 1 got made. It wasn't like we just wrote scripts and it was perfect. Like, everything was building on top of each other. And so this sort of dog chases its tail dynamic to the finish line was how season 1 got made. Everyone was just kind of all hands on deck. Even Carl Jones helped out on some of the character designs, you know what I'm saying?
But it sounds like you took on some leadership roles that allowed you to then really cut your teeth, right? Like to really now have a skill set that you didn't have. And it sounds like in every step, it was like what looked like work, you ended up doing, but it leveled you up and it leveled you up.
Right, and so what happened was, once I had my storyboarding skills, I wasn't a co-director. I was a co-director on season 1, but I wasn't co-director on season 2, even though Aaron offered me the job to be a director for season 2 because he was so happy with what we did. I turned it down because it looked like work.
Like, I ain't trying to do
And I
that.
also didn't want a bullseye on my back. You know what I'm saying? I was really shook about having that kind of pressure, and I didn't feel I was ready, to be honest. And so when that was done, it took like 2-3 years for Boondock season 3 to get going. And so we had to get other work. And so I wound up getting work by Glamour Comedy, the creator of Teen Titans.
Teen Titans, come on, we just asked for that.
And Glamour Comedy was the creator of Ben 10 Alien Force. That was the 10. And so Dwayne McDuffie was the story editor of Ben 10 Alien Force. And that was the first time I finally got to work with him. And so I worked on that project for about a year. And after season 1 was done, Sam Register, who then was just an executive producer, had moved to Warner Brothers to become the big cheese and sort of revitalize Warner Brothers. And so he convinced me to come over there because he and I became good buddies. And so, but at that point, when I got to Warner Brothers, that's when I decided I wanted to leave because I learned that a lot of the animation, and I always felt that, but I never thought that I would be in a position to direct. When I realized that I wanted to direct within the studio system, there were too many challenges to have real influence because so much of the animation production from layout to ink and paint was done overseas in South Korea. And so me having already left New York, anything else I did was incidental, you know what I mean? Because I didn't want to leave New York. I tried to stay as long as I could. I didn't even get my passport till 2007. That's how New York I was. Like, I was just not trying to go nowhere, you know what I'm saying? And so
You're trying to leave the block. It's like,
you know what I'm saying? Like, and so for me, I started, once I got my passport, I started going to Rome, I started getting this travel bug. All the money spent on games, gear, was out the window. Like, how much money can I save for tickets? You know what I mean? Because I wanted to explore. And so by the time I got to Warner Brothers, the idea of going to Korea popped into my head because I didn't like the idea that I couldn't see how the sausage was made. I was sitting in these record sessions, in these post-retake sessions. Retakes is when animation comes back and you have to retake cuts. You know, a character's off model or the color is wrong. This is a part of every animated TV show that you watch goes through in production. And, you know, I learned that some of my directors, being a part of this retake session, didn't know who the animators were animating the scenes that they had problems with. Now, this is all process junkie talk, y'all. This is TV production technical knowledge. Like, how do you manage a team to get the best out of them based on their skills? So it's kind of like doing a manga. If y'all are trying to do manga, you got a person who's an inker. Nowadays, mangaka do their own stuff. They do colors, inks, writing. But generally, it's still, you need assistance. You need a team to finish a comic book faster. The more people, the faster the work is done. And animation works the same way. It's all production by committee, especially TV animation. And we're talking 2D animation, not 3D animation for the adults in the room who don't know the difference between 2D and 3D. 2D is hand-drawn, 3D is computer, Pixar. 2D is basically, and the reason why I love 2D is because I love illustration. And 2D animation is 2D animation is illustration and filmmaking combined. It's two of my favorite things combined, and that's why I love 2D hand-drawn animation. That's why I love comics. That's why I love, anime. And
I was really, really bothered by the fact that nobody knew who animated what. It was just bizarre to me. Like, how do you not have your best action Sakura guy handling the action sequences? Why is he animating cars? He don't know how to animate cars.
So it came from a real like curiosity.
Yeah, it was a genuine curiosity. Like, how do you get your skill set? And by the time I had gotten to this point, I had already worked with comics with a group of people. I already done my own web cartoons with George Jackson. So I had an idea of managing talent and meeting deadlines. And so when I got to animation with the Boondocks seasons 1 and 2, and then Ben 10, I saw another version of that at the higher level in production. So by the time I got to Warner Brothers, I was just like, yeah, nah, if I'm gonna make a show, I'm not gonna have no janky animation and then run out of retake budget, because that happens a lot when they run out of the budget, because all retake budgets are very limited. You can only retake stuff so much, otherwise you're gonna be late and your show's gonna be expensive. And so,
Money.
yeah, exactly.
Gotta manage the team, gotta manage the money, gotta manage the talent.
Right, and so for me, I was just like, how do I get, maybe I can go overseas. And one of the animators on Boondocks was a Korean who had been brought to the States to work on season 2. Aaron got him hooked up with the working papers, and his name is Ryu Kyun. Ryu Kyun's famous now. He's one of the producers of Legend of Korra. He's on Dragons, Dota Dragons. Dota. And so, but at that time, both of us were young at Warner Brothers, and I knew he had just come from Korea. I knew South Korea and Seoul, and I knew that he had worked in the animation industry. And I was like, yo, dog, like, what's the possibility of like Americans working in the animation industry over there? And he was like, you crazy. Because, the Korean won is much cheaper than the dollar. That's why we outsource our animation portions to South Korea, and they work 7 days a week. It's a grind, and there's no unions out there. And so they was just like, none of my American local peers was like, yo, that's a good look. They were like, nah, I'm good, And so for me, like I said, I had already left New York and I felt the ways about that. So going to Korea is the same as going to Greensboro. You know what I'm saying? It was like, all right, cool. And I didn't like LA anyway. You know what I'm saying? Because I was traumatized by Greensboro. I got to drive everywhere. You take 45 minutes just to get milk. You know what I'm saying? I was just still very, very New York. And so, but I love traveling. And so, I convinced Ryu to hook me up with someone he knew that worked in the animation industry. And to my point, these outsourcing studios visit these animation original ideas from their mangaka, and then those mangas sell multi-million copies, and then those multi-million copies get turned into animated series.
So is that the reason? So that difference, right? So you have South Korea where it's kind of like the work is being done, but then Japan is where the original thoughts and ideas are being.
In a sense, for
being
TV
developed.
animation, for sure, they're just way more active. You know what I'm saying? South Korea puts out some stuff too, but it's mainly in-country, preschool stuff. Nothing high level for 15 and up or 30-year-olds in TVMA. But anyway, I moved to South Korea because I learned that the timing directors are people who time the cuts and put them on X sheets and hand them to the animators. So when the animator's getting the cuts, they have an X sheet that tells them how many frames a second each cut is, so they can know how to do it. And even the timing of the frames. And that determines the style of movement, whether you're slowing in or slowing out. And I just thought that was personally goofy. I'm like, how do you have timing directors? And these timing directors are old timing directors. They come from the Hanna-Barbera era, the 80s era. And it was just a systemic, myopic process that never got cleaned up, in my opinion. They would send these X sheets by these old animators who hadn't animated anything in years to dudes working on Korra and Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm like, why are you not letting these cats cook? Let them time the cuts and give us the sauce, which is how they do it in Japan. And so I was like, nah, I want to go overseas. And I also didn't want to be stuck in that retake room not knowing who was working on my stuff. And because they're just like people, like us, you have to be friends with these cats. You got to have dinner with them. You got to chop it up with them, you know what I'm saying? And when you make friends in the animation field, we know how it works. They give you the sauce. There's a difference between doing work to hack it in for some dude to get a check, and then your homie's joint. You want to put the extra time in. Everybody in Korea works exactly the same way. And so I understood that, or at least I hoped I understood it. And I convinced Ryu to introduce me to Jung Mi, who was the head of JM Animation. And when she came to visit Warner Brothers, I gave her one of my makeshift art books and was like, what's the possibility of going to Korea? And she looked at me like, yeah, she was like, you crazy. Because she said the same thing. Like, we don't normally have Americans who willingly want to come to Korea and work. We usually have them brought in by Warner Brothers. They get the nice hotel. They point out a few things for a week, and then they go back to the States. But I was like, nah, I want to be a part of the process. How do I get into the system? And so a few weeks later, she got her translator to contact me, and then months later, they got my visa set up, and they set me up with an apartment. She set me up with an apartment. She said, I'll let you come to Korea if you can get here. We'll set you up with a visa, get you an apartment by the studio, and you can come work. Now, the reason why she did that wasn't because she thought, you know, Black Lives Matter or any of that stuff. She saw me as a foreigner who was not only willing to come to her place, but I came from Hollywood. I knew how to make series Bibles. And in Korea, they don't create their own shows, especially in that time period. So they didn't know how to pitch to Warner Brothers. They didn't know how to pitch to any of the studios. And so they had someone in-house now that they can mine the information on how to put a series Bible together. How many episodes? What's the target demographic? What sells in it? And my exchange would be able to get freelance work. And so there was a mutual self-interest, you know what I'm saying, to get me to come out there. This is all very, very rare. This is not a normal thing.
It's the impossible,
Yeah.
right? But then, even within that, and I know there's a lot of nuances and pieces in there, but then you end up working through that process and all of the work that you did in there. You end up working with like some of the greatest animators and character designers in the history of anime.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
how in the world
well,
do you go from I'm gonna come to Korea and grind a little bit to then like, yo, I'm gonna do Yasuke, yo, I got you. Like, how do you do
well,
that?
how I get to that point was by the time, I didn't realize at the time, I was only supposed to be there for a year. And then there was a split between JM Animation and the director there. And they squashed their beef, but I had a visa being supported by JM for 1 year, and I had become really close friends with that director. And so when they split off, well, they split off because Brian and Mike, the creators of Avatar: The Last Airbender, were trying to do a sequel called The Legend of Korra, and they came to JM.
Legend of Korra, that was a good one.
They pitched Legend of Korra to Yu Young, who was the director that had took me under his wing, because him and his team had animated the last, maybe the Souls and Comet run towards the end of Avatar: The Last Airbender. That was a really incredible animation. And so they got the Korra project, they split, and Yu Young took me with him and extended my visa for 4 more years so that I could stay and work under him, and we did Legend of Korra Book 1. So I was in-house as a storyboard artist on Team B at Studio Mir for Book 1 of Legend of Korra. And so by the time I was done with that production, Korra wrapped up and they had to wait for a new season to get picked up. And so I started working at other studios because I started making friends with a lot of South Korean animators. Now the reason why I did that is because at the time, you can't pitch an animated show in 2009 to a company like Nickelodeon or Warner Brothers unless you had a series Bible, which was paid. It's very hard back then to get a quality animator to give you an animated trailer to convince them to see what it finally looks like finished. Because all the animators were in South Korea and the studios were beholden to those studios. No one regular person could go to South Korea. And so by me going to Korea, I realized I could use that opportunity to make friends with these animators, pay them a little while here and there to put together a 20-second trailer, 30-second trailer.
New York hustle.
You know, as they say, you know, like when we talked about Frank Lucas, American Gangster, you know what I'm saying? He went to Vietnam, got stuff raw before it was stepped on, and then came back, you know, make your own stuff. And so that's kind of how I was thinking. And I wasn't afraid to go back to New York, America, because everybody in South Korea wanted to go to America to make more money. So if I went back, it would have been a personal failure, not an L for me financially. And so that's why I took those calculated risks. And so by the time I came back, my boy Carl Jones had introduced me to working on his project, which was Black Dynamite. He had like Boondocks and he got Black Dynamite. And so we did Black Dynamite together, and then I branched off and started working on my own trailers and working on my own stuff. And so right around the time that happened, Netflix popped up. Because around 2020,
We know Netflix, right? I know y'all share accounts. I see y'all. You know.
And so how I got in touch with the Japanese studios was through my relationship and my experience with South Korea and connecting with animators to help me out on my pilot. And so what wound up happening was Netflix saw what I was doing and wanted to expand what was going on in TV animation. And they were trying to compete with the legacy studios. And so they started creating all of this content and expanding and introducing new voices. And they saw what I was doing, and they saw that I had a relationship with a Japanese studio, and they saw my trailers, and they were like, how did you get a Japanese studio to do all of this stuff? Can we work with you? And so that's how I got my first project, Cannabis is Green with that Netflix.
So we get a round of applause for that.
And so once I started working on Cannabis, because I had all that experience working in South Korea, when the deal went through, I mandated that they pay for my stay say they put me up in an apartment so that I can live in Tokyo because I don't like outsourcing. I want to see the sausage.
You want to
made
connect.
in the
You want to
beginning to
connect.
rock. That's why I went over there. And so I was like, and I was a fan of not just anime. Like, I have a relationship with anime as a medium, but you gotta understand, by the time I got to Japan, I already had Boondocks under my belt as a creative leader. You know what I'm saying? I already have Mike Dynamite as a producer, supervising director, as a creative leader. So I wasn't going there as some fanboy, like, yo, make my anime, make my manga into an anime. I was trying to build with the actual production teams, because that's the language that I speak. I don't work in print media. I don't work in comics. I work in TV and film. And a lot of times we say manga and anime because we don't have any connection to the anime part. We just know manga is adapted into anime. But manga is print media. Very, very cheap. That's why we do it.
100%.
Anime is TV and film. It costs millions and millions.
So what
Millions
children
and millions
need
and millions and millions of dollars. You don't get
$8
that.
million bucks on this.
Canvas
About
is
8
a
million.
series about 8 million.
About
That's
8
cheap
million.
for a series. And because I had all this experience on Boondocks and Black Dynamite, I was able to squeeze that 8 million out. Because I knew who my animator's strength were. I knew where to put them. I knew where to make shortcuts and so on and so forth. And so kids who see this stuff don't see what goes on behind the scenes, but that's exactly how these TV shows get made. And so because John Dadarian saw how smooth and Cannabis was working, he was like, yo man, like, we want YASUKE to be your next project. And the reason why he wanted YASUKE to be the next project, because I pitched that the year prior. And so he saw what I could do with these Japanese studios, and so he wanted to see if I'd be interested in making the other show that I pitched. And the reason why he came to me was not because of Black Lives Matter, which is important. They should come to me for that. We need all the hookups we need. But my point is that he came to me because he saw an individual who can manage hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, from design, storyboards, key animation, in between, ink and paint, compositing, and then a completely different medium, music, acting, and orchestrating that, and still maintaining the vision, and then deliver it on time and on budget. This is what's called a showrunner. These are executive producers.
Can we clap it up for that? That's super important to know. He actually just gave you the whole, like, he could just drop the mic and walk out right now and just say, like, I just gave you the formula for making an anime. And not only that, making a large-scale production, which is extremely important to understand, right? And, I know, we're running out of time, so I want to try to pace us, and because I don't want to once over that. I don't want to move quickly past that. That's very important to know and understand when you think about this idea of, like, how do I create the thing? That's how you create the thing, right? But in that, right, there's these nuances of, doing the work, looking at things that seem like work and actually executing, creating skill sets, consistently working with your friends and your peers to know how good you are, and then raising that bar, facing fear, right, all of those things. So, before we kind of end this portion of our conversation and allow you guys to go check out the galleries and stuff, there's one thing that I think is super important as everyone here, and even some of the adults up in the beginning of their journey. And I really want you to talk about kind of like that North Star piece, and how did you stay focused, like really, really focused? Because this takes a lot of focus. You went through, death in the family. You went through challenges in life. You went through COVID, right? Really, I would say, let that be the last thing that we leave as far as the thought that we want to leave with the youth, and say, how did you keep focused on the North Star? Like,
Yeah, I think it comes down to the same thing. What is your purpose? You have to want your purpose more than the obstacles that are presented in front of you. And that's not an easy skill to develop. That's a life skill, because we're all trained to avoid fear. We're all trained to avoid challenge. We're only trained to enjoy the good times, and we want to stack those good times as much as possible. But the good times work because of those negative moments. And so for me, I understood, one, that fear is a part of innovation. When you're doing something new, every artist in here, you're scared when you look at the blank page. Oh damn, I gotta make this hot again. Let me go do what I normally do that make me. Let me go draw my character with no hands and no feet.
cut them feet
You know
off.
what I'm saying? Like, you have to have it. You say, we call it a North Star. This is the thing that you're pursuing. No matter what's in your way, this is the goal. And that's not an easy thing to suggest. It's easy to say, but but everybody in this room has an individual path that they have to navigate with their own individual obstacles. And so for me, fear is a part of those challenges, you know, going into the unknown. And I've learned over time that, you know, having a North Star allows me to not allow fear, you know, to stop me from doing these things. I just do it scared.
Do it scared.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah, I just do it scared. Like, I'm shook, but I still gotta do this thing. And so for me, it's like, I've mentioned this to you this week, it's like the roller coaster, the front car of the roller coaster. Nobody, I don't.
How many of y'all get on that front car? I don't get on that front car.
Some people
at all.
crazy, they're like, yo, front car, let me do it. You know, and for me, it's the front car of the roller coaster. You get on it, you're going up to that incline, and you're like, oh my God, this joint's about to drop. And then it drops, and you're terrified for about a good few seconds, and then you realize, oh, okay, and it's going up and down. Oh my God, this is terrible. And then it stops, and you're like, woo, and you're like, yo, that was alright. I want to do that again. And that's kind of how I engage with my craft. You know, even with these projects, YASUKE Canvas, either like it's bigger now because now I'm dealing with money, but the goal is still to make something cool, to put something out, and to push forward. So for me, you know, fear for me is part of the process. What I'm actually scared of is being in the same place I am next year this day. And so for me, I know what the consequences of that look like. That's me moving back to New York if I failed in LA. That's me going back to Korea if it didn't work out. I mean, going back to California if it didn't work out in Korea. Or dropping the ball in Japan and having to come back to the States. And so, you know, everybody has a different method of what motivates them to push through things. For me, it's about stagnation. And I only got over that fear because I tasted a little bit of success. Someone pays you for your art, you know what I'm saying, or you get a response from something. Whatever that thing is, that's the thing that, you know, if you want to make a change in this industry and you want to, you know, put something out there to get people talking about your work or changing the dynamic, it's just having a little bit of taste of success. And I know some people in this room probably tasted a little bit, some haven't experienced it yet, and that's usually the thing. And so for me, you know, once I get a taste, that becomes my North Star. And then I just start pursuing that purpose. And everything else is just incidental, you know.
Amazing. LeSean Thomas, everyone.